Hi there, and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Here's what we're looking at.
We're talking about people's lives. We're talking about the homes that they live in.
How legislation in Springfield aims to help Cook County homeowners facing mountains of property tax debt.
Make no mistake, if any object presents a threat to the safety and security of the American people, I will take it down.
Did the Pentagon really use a $400,000 missile to shoot down a $12 balloon launched by this Illinois hobbyist group?
Documents lay out what went wrong with an illegally built museum in Humboldt Park.
And the one and only Patti Smith talks about her influential career, her time as a waitress, and her favorite children's book. Now to some of today's top stories. The 5 former Memphis cops charged in the beating death of Tyree Nichols pleaded not guilty to multiple charges today, including second-degree murder. An attorney for one of the men, Tadarius Bean, says his client was doing his job and, quote, never touched Nichols.
And he never struck him. And there has been no information that we have seen as of right now that indicates that there's any sort of information that we can rely on.
Police body cam video shows 5 officers beating 29-year-old Nichols after a traffic stop and foot chase in early January. He died 3 days later. Other officers have also been fired or suspended from the Memphis police force. The 5 men in court today are due back in early May.
9 candidates running for various offices in the upcoming Chicago election are facing possible ethics fines. Today, the City Board of Ethics determined there was probable cause to believe those candidates violated an ordinance by using city property in their campaign advertisements. If they're found to have violated the law, they could face fines of up to $20,000 per violation. The 9 enforcement actions, an unprecedented number for the board to take at a single meeting, were approved at a special meeting of the Chicago Board of Ethics approximately 2 weeks after Chair William Conlin sent a warning to all candidates: do not use images of uniformed Chicago police officers or firefighters or city personnel in campaign advertisements.
Early voting has been halted for voters in the 28th ward now that an Illinois appellate court is ordering the city's election commissioners to return a candidate's name to the ballot. The court says Sean A. Walker's name should now appear on the ballot along with current 28th ward alderman Jason Irvin. Block Club Chicago reported Walker had originally lost his spot on the ballot for not having enough valid signatures to qualify. The Board of Elections says so far 359 early voting ballots have been cast by 28th ward voters. They're being isolated and voters notified. Meanwhile, any 28th ward voter will not be able to obtain a ballot at any polling location in the city until further notice.
After unveiling his proposal to make major investments in early childhood education, Governor Pritzker and state officials are campaigning across Illinois on what they're calling the Smart Start Tour. Today, they stopped in Chicago.
We are doing the whole spectrum from prenatal to 5. We are investing in doulas. We are investing in home visiting. We are investing in infant early childhood mental health and early intervention and preschool and capital and the workforce.
Pritzker's proposal is based on research that investing resources in a child's earliest years leads to higher graduation rates, higher college attendance rates, and lower health care costs, among other benefits. The Smart Start Illinois plan would mean a $250 million investment for fiscal year 2024, including creating more preschool slots, boosting pay for child care providers, and expanding home visiting services.
Coming up in the program, why an unapproved museum addition was built on the city's west side.
But first, how some state lawmakers are trying to help residents have a fair shot at keeping their homes amid high property taxes. That's right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
State lawmakers are attempting to take on Cook County's controversial tax sale system. If homeowners are delinquent more than a year on making property tax payments, they're at risk of owing large interest payments to private investors who buy up that debt. Ultimately, they could face losing their home altogether. After some noteworthy studies put out by the Cook County Treasurer's Office, lawmakers say it's time to give those residents a fair shot at keeping their homes. Back in November, we met Garfield Park homeowner Henry Johnson, who fell behind on his property tax payments and faced a nightmare of debt. Johnson is on a fixed income and had financial issues after the death of his wife.
She was an educator. She's able to help with everything, but after that, that made a big difference.
Johnson owed interest of 1.5% a month to Cook County, accruing to 18% over the course of a year. After that, his property, like all others, went to the Cook County tax sale, where private investors swoop in to buy up that debt. They charge up to 12% per year for a total of 54% interest over the course of 3 years. Basically, this is very poor people paying very rich people.
Very poor people paying the wealthiest in the country, beyond the wealthiest. These are hedge funds.
Johnson's original tax bill was less than $1,800, but that shot up to $8,173 after subsequent bills, interest, and fees, all owed at once if he wanted to keep his home.
We're talking about people's lives. We're talking about the homes that they live in.
Anthony Simpkins is the head of Neighborhood Housing Services, a nonprofit that helped Johnson make his payment and keep his home. Simpkins says many homeowners resort to drastic methods to get out of debt.
They borrow and they, forego buying medicine and all kinds of other stuff in order to get these bills paid.
Now, a group of bills filed in Springfield aims to make it easier for those homeowners to hang on. A bill backed by Cook County Treasurer Maria Pappas would cut the yearly interest rate on the debt in half, from 18% to 9%.
If your penalty is now $500, it's going to be $250. And in this economy and this kind of inflation and this kind of poverty that we're experiencing, that's a lot of money for a homeowner.
Another bill would reform the state's sale and error law. A study from Pappas's office found that most tax buyers use a loophole in state law to get a full refund on the property after it collects all the interest from people like Johnson. The buyer simply points to any minor thing wrong with a property as an excuse to offload it, and the county taxing bodies have to fork over all of the cash.
The website of the assessor says that there's an air conditioner, and there's no air conditioner. I thought there was a toilet, and there's no toilet. I thought there was a basement, there is no basement. Here, take it back.
Proposed legislation would now move it toward a buyer beware system. Pappas says the message to the tax buyer is, if you acquire the property, you have to keep it.
Hey, look, you're going to buy this. If there's 2 windows or 3 windows, that's your problem. But you can't come in the last minute and escape a sale on a house that you really didn't want in the first place.
Another bill sponsored by State Senator Robert Peters would give the homeowner a chance to pay off their property tax debt in installments rather than one lump sum.
As long as they're making payments, that they don't risk losing their home, right? They just need to keep making payments to their tax debt.
Brad Westover is president of the National Tax Lien Association, a group that represents tax buyers. He says the tax sale is necessary because without the penalty, homeowners don't have incentive to pay taxes on time.
This process is a means by which kind of everybody pays their fair share.
But Westover has said that his association would be supportive of some of the changes represented in this legislation. Johnson finally paid off his debt in October. He says the legislation would have been of great benefit to him.
Everything is good. There was sleepless nights and worried, but back in my mind there was going to be some way, somehow it was going to be done.
Treasurer Pappas says that more than 55,000 properties had their delinquent property taxes up for auction at the Cook County tax sale last year. 21,000 of those owed less than $1,000. Brandis.
Paris, since the United States downed a Chinese spy balloon just off the South Carolina coast on February 4th, President Joe Biden has ordered 3 more objects of unknown origin shot out of the sky. The incidents have created a diplomatic dust-up with China and created the impression that North American skies are teeming with potentially hostile UFOs. Here's a little of what President Biden had to say yesterday about his decision to have those 3 objects shot down last weekend.
The intelligence community's current assessment is that these 3 objects were most likely balloons tied to private companies, recreation or research institutions studying weather or conducting other scientific research. But make no mistake, if any object presents a threat to the safety and security of the American people, I will take it down.
So joining us now to delve into this balloon flap are Ian Hurd, professor of political science and a specialist on international law and international relations at Northwestern University, and Craig Kafora, a national security and foreign policy specialist at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Thanks to you both for joining us. Craig Kafora, let's start with you, please. The drama over the Chinese spy balloon creating quite a stir. Some commentators critical of the president's decision to allow it to float across the U.S. Before shooting it down. Do you think that was the right decision? Should it have been taken out earlier?
I think the administration made the right decision here, and I think that's the case for three reasons. So first of all, and I think most importantly to Americans who were under the flight path, shooting down a balloon with that large of a payload means that you've got a lot of debris falling out of the sky from a fairly high altitude. Now, some of this is over some fairly rural area, but damage to property, potentially injuring people on the ground, that's something the administration clearly wanted to avoid. Secondly, by knowing that this balloon is there, the United States was able to use its own surveillance activity forces to be able to take a look at this balloon to see what kind of things it's able to transmit and receive to get a really good picture of what they're up against. And then thirdly, by waiting for it to transit over some fairly shallow water off the coast of South Carolina, it's a lot easier for them to be able to recover the debris, which they're currently fishing out of the sea.
Ian Hurd, how would you assess how the Biden administration has handled this balloon crisis?
I think it's done relatively well, largely because it has avoided escalating things and freaking out, to be honest. It has not freaked out. So it's been quite measured. It's taken its time. It only took a few days to identify these objects. So it's done a pretty good job of not escalating things into unnecessary weirdness.
What impact, if any, do you think the downing of the Chinese spy balloon in particular will have on relations with Beijing?
Well, it's certainly an issue for sure. And so the different objects are very different. And the first one was clearly a Chinese spy balloon, as you say, and the others are more or less trash floating around. So the Chinese spy issue is a serious one for American security types because they're worried about what the Chinese government is capable of doing in that airspace between where satellites fly and where airplanes fly. There's a lot of room there. But there's not a whole lot of danger from any of this in the way that we see it right now. The trash problem is perhaps even more important because it's a reminder that there's a lot of junk floating around in that space. And it can get in the way of airplanes if it comes down. It can get in the way of radar. It can do all kinds of things and be a problem, just like pollution in the ocean is a problem. And no one's paid much attention to that until now.
Craig Kafura, same question to you. What impact do you think the downing of the Chinese spy balloon could have on relations between the two countries?
Well, this really did come at an unfortunate time for U.S.-China relations. There were some senses in the U.S. that China was attempting a bit of a diplomatic outreach campaign. It's been mending ties with Australia recently. There were plans for Secretary Blinken to travel to Beijing just a couple days after this balloon entered U.S. airspace. Obviously, this put the kibosh on that. And so now you're waiting maybe for Blinken to talk with Wang Yi, potentially this weekend in Munich. It has certainly knocked things off course. The other concerning sign, of course, is that the U.S. and the PRC have not been able to engage in military-to-military talks following the downing of this balloon. This has been a repeated problem in U.S.-China relations in the past. When there is a crisis and we have a hotline, Beijing doesn't always pick up the other end of that phone. Hopefully, the two sides will be able to resume some talks soon and get things on a bit of a more stable course.
Now, as I mentioned, since downing the Chinese balloon, the Biden administration has ordered 3 other objects to be shot down. At least one of these objects appears to be, or to have been, a balloon launched by the Northern Illinois Bottle Cap Balloon Brigade. That has not necessarily been confirmed yet, we should be clear. Craig, is it an embarrassment at all that the Pentagon appears to have used a $400,000 Sidewinder missile to shoot down a potentially $12 hobby balloon?
Oh, it might be a little bit of a black mark for them, though. I think the Northern Illinois Bottle Cap Balloon Brigade should take it as a mark of pride. Not everyone can say they've had a balloon shot down over the Yukon by the U.S. Air Force. But this is another reminder, I think, as Ian said, of just how much stuff is floating in this zone between commercial air travel and these really, really high altitude balloons that are used for espionage purposes. These things get off course, they lose signal, people lose track of them, and then they're just floating out there. And if NORAD isn't necessarily looking for those kinds of objects, they're going to miss them.
Ian Hurd, President Biden mentioned that NORAD is now doing more to track slow-moving objects in U.S. airspace. The downing of the Chinese spy balloon and those 3 other objects is the first time that NORAD has ever shot down objects in U.S. airspace like this. Do you think the administration may have overreacted?
It's hard to say. I think it certainly would be good if they did not make a habit of doing this sort of thing, because there's a lot of stuff floating around up there, and if you start shooting at it indiscriminately, eventually somebody's going to get hurt. You're going to shoot down a plane by accident. You're going to make things worse. So hopefully that won't be the reaction. But you know, too, there's a lot of people who think of borders as being kind of like impermeable barriers around the country with a thick black line that separates the inside and the outside, and that's never been the case. That's just a myth. All kinds of things are crossing borders all the time. Weather and radio waves and balloons and water and pollution and all this stuff. So we live with borders that get crossed by lots of things all the time, and it's not really a problem. So we may need to get a little bit less anxious about what the border means and appreciate that there's a lot of flow back and forth across borders, and that's just life. It's not a threat.
Greg Kaffour, is this in any way a wake-up call that the U.S. needs to do a better job of monitoring its airspace for threats?
I think there's been a little bit of that. You've heard from NORAD that they are going to focus a little bit more on looking for the specific kind of signatures they see from these really high-altitude espionage balloons. And they've now started reporting that there may have been other balloon flights similar to this PRC spy balloon during the Trump administration near other U.S. military bases, especially in the Pacific. And you've seen from U.S. allies, too. Japan has reported that they think 3 flights like this took place over Japanese territory between 2019 and 2022. So I do think folks both in the U.S. and outside the country are going to be spending a little bit more time looking up to see what's up there.
That'll be fun for all of us. I'm super curious about the balloon from the Bottle Cap Balloon Brigade, but that is where we'll have to leave it for now. Greg Kaffour and Ian Hurd, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, what went wrong with an illegally built museum in Humboldt Park? But first, a look at the forecast this weekend. There still aren't any signs that the cinder block shell next to the Humboldt Park Receptory and Stables building will be finished anytime soon. And a newly compiled paper trail shows the illegal construction of that building violated rules since its inception. WTTW News reporter Patti Whetley joins us now with more. Patti, remind us why the Park District, Department of Buildings have stopped the building of what was supposed to be the National Museum of Puerto Rican Arts and Culture's proposed archive building.
Right. Well, they stopped it because they never got any permits to build it in the first place. So because the museum is in this historic Chicago landmarked building, there are so many processes that you need to go to get permission to build, so many specifications, details that you need to provide to city and state agencies in this case, because they did get some state money for this. You know, you can't build anything in Chicago. I can't even practically put a doorknob on a building without a permit. And they started putting up this structure with no permits.
And they've gotten this far along,
and
as
they got
evidenced
fairly
by
far
this
along.
video. Yes.
Correct.
So a member of Preservation Chicago has put together a 16-page statement of facts of the situation.
Yes.
What do they show?
They show that there was a lot of misrepresentation that went on depending on who the leaders of the museum were speaking to. So at first this was supposed to be 1,500 square feet. Now it's 6,800 square feet.
Big difference.
People aren't sure it's actually an archive because none of the renderings show anything that resembles an archive. What they were going to do with this venue seems to be up for grabs. And so it's kind of like, did you know what you were supposed to apply for permits? Did you not? Considering that the president of the museum is a former alderman, certainly aware of how the permit process works in Chicago.
Any response from museum leadership so far?
I mean, they said, first, they didn't respond to any of our requests for comment, but they have told other media outlets that it was honest mistakes made. Folks, again, would say, you know, you're very aware of the process and that you need building permits, especially for a historic landmark building.
And what has the Park District said about what is next for this project?
Well, at the most recent meeting of the Park District Board, General Superintendent, CEO Rosa Escareno said this is a very long and involved process. There's a lot to untangle because you have multiple state and city agencies involved in this. Again, there's that 16-page document of paper trail, and they want the museum to go back to square one. Granted, there already is a building structure started and in place, but they want them to go back and start the whole process over and do it right this time, which would also include community meetings and feedback on this.
A lot more work to be done over there, it sounds
yeah,
like.
so that cinder block is not going anywhere for a while. You know, hopefully at some point.
Patti Whetley, just stay on it for us.
Yes,
Thank you,
I
Patti.
will. Thanks.
And you can read Patti's full story on our website, WTTW.com/news. Paris, back to you.
Brandis, thanks. Born in Chicago and raised in New Jersey, Patti Smith has lived an incomparable life as a poet and a performer. She's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and won a National Book Award, and she's commonly called the Punk Poet Laureate. Late last year, Patti Smith was in town to accept an honor from the Chicago-based Poetry Foundation. Chicago Tonight spoke with her. We aired a portion of that interview back in November, but now we've dug a little bit deeper. Here is more of our interview with Patti Smith.
Upon the meek, the grace and shower, it's decreed, the people rule. People have the power. People have the power.
It belongs to everyone. So many people secretly write poetry when they're young, all through their life. It's been a continuing mode of expression, a revolutionary mode of expression, constantly changing throughout the course of history, through rock and roll, and through hip-hop, through whatever mode of communication each generation embraces. It sort of democratizes this kind of elevated conversation or elevated expression. When I read Little Women, there was a girl who was a bit like me, sort of a tomboy, gangly, socially inept, and a bookworm who wrote. And from that book I learned, it almost gave me permission to write, you know, to be sort of an awkward girl who was growing up in a society where girls were groomed to be homemakers or hairdressers or secretaries. Your options were, especially in a lower middle class area, they weren't very expansive. And in reading that, I had a whole other goal, which I held fast to for the rest of my life. My first job I got as a waitress lasted for about 4 hours. They gave me this giant platter of veal parmesan, and I was like, never held such a big platter, and I tripped over something, and the whole thing went on to this woman's tweed suit. So that was the end of my career as a waitress. I was very lucky when I was young, growing up in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s at the Chelsea Hotel. I met many great artists, and I had wonderful mentors. I mean, I had William Burroughs and Allen Ginsberg as two of my mentors who really devoted a lot of time and supported me and gave me advice and invited me to perform with them.
From the Portobello Road to the Port of Marseille, where the dervish turns, where the wild goats play, looking for you, I was.
I don't place myself in a position to advise people how to conduct their life, but if I could only tell them one thing, I would say to work hard. To work hard every day and keep your focus on the work and doing the best work that you can. And all of the peripheral things, especially in the present culture, social media and all of the different aspects that people are involved in, put them in their proper proportion. The most important thing is the work. And also, you know, believe in yourself, even when others don't.
Lucky for all of us, Patti Smith was a far better musician than waitress, apparently. And her new book, A Book of Days, was recently published. More details on our website. And that is our show for this Friday night. Join us tomorrow night at 6 for Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices. Destigmatizing mental health for the Latino communities, young and old.
And then at 6:30 tomorrow on Chicago Tonight, Black Voices, we dive into two new initiatives trying to preserve untold stories that made a major local impact on the civil rights and Black Power movements. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that is proud to be a multilingual law firm that provides translators for a variety of languages.
Next time on Antiques Roadshow, antiques are the gifts that keep on giving.
I think that there was a lot of effort and thought that went into this gift for your family.
She let me have it as
She
a
gave
gift.
it to you.
She gave it to me
As
as
a
a
present.
gift.
It's Antiques Roadshow, next time from Cheekwood in Nashville.
Monday at 7 on WTTW.
Chicago's advertising wizards gave us iconic figures.
Whoever thought of flying on a plane is a friendly thing?
They took on Madison Avenue with a down-to-earth Chicago style of advertising.
There was just this lightning in a bottle at the time.
That little white creature was welcome in any household.
Isn't making ads the most fun you ever had in your life?
The real Mad Men of Chicago on Chicago Stories.
On American Experience, Monopoly is America's game. It's the game of our childhood.
But there's a dark side